So before we get into looking at the prayer activities, I want us to pause on this slide. So Rebecca Nye and David Hay, they're both English. They did a big piece of research into children's spirituality. They asked some questions. What do the spiritual lives of children look like? How do children express their spiritual lives? And Rebecca and I wrote a little book called Children's Spirituality. I don't know if it is godly play something that you're familiar with. So there's a couple of people nodding. Okay, so godly play is another model of teaching Bible stories, and Rebecca Nye sort of heads godly play in England. And so she wrote this little book, Children's Spirituality, and in the book they talk about this grid, these 4 areas, and what they suggest is that all of this is spiritual life. Not just this. Not just the divine other, the mystical, the luminous, the beyond, what we can see and feel and touch. Yes, of course, that's a huge part of what it means to be spiritual, to connect with, to commune with God. But our spiritual lives are far more than that. Our spiritual lives is to do with our understanding, our relationship with ourselves. Who am I? What does it mean for me to be a flesh and blood and spirit and soul being? What does it mean for me to be made in the image of God? To be made to connect with the divine? What does that mean? What does it mean for me to be uniquely and wonderfully made? This is an important part of our spiritual life. Jesus says, love others as you love yourself. There's something about learning to love ourselves, to understand ourselves, which is an important part of our spiritual journey. Yeah? And those of you who are working with children and young people, you know how much a battleground that is. Yeah? How much... I've got 3 daughters. My youngest is 14. She's on Instagram and Snapchat and all these social media things. I said to her a few weeks ago, there was this lovely photo that she'd taken of herself on the beach. We lived right beside the beach in the north of England. She'd taken this beautiful photo of herself. And I was trying to find it on Instagram. And I said to her, where is that photo? It's disappeared. And she said, oh, I deleted it because it didn't have enough likes. Yeah? Now those of you working with children and young people will know what I'm talking about. So much, there's incredible pressure on them at the moment to present something that is likeable. Everything seems to be about, are you liked by others? And their self-esteem, their value of themselves as human beings is under threat constantly with this pressure to present themselves as unique and wonderful. And when God comes to them, he says, I love you as you are. You're amazing as you are. And an important part of our spiritual identity is receiving that and believing that and knowing that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. This is a core part of our spiritual life. It's also to do with how we connect with others. It's to do with our relationships with others. It's to do with how I think and feel and believe different things to you, and how do I learn from you? How do I receive Jesus in you? Mother Teresa said famously, I don't work with the poor to be Jesus to them. I work with the poor because I see Jesus in them. Every homeless person is Jesus in a distressing disguise. There's something about our spiritual journey which is about receiving one another and connecting with one another. Jesus, he prayed unanswered prayer, oh that they may be one. Oh that they may connect. Oh that they may find belonging in one another as we are one. There's something important about our spiritual life that is about our relationships with others. There's also something important about our spiritual life which is to do with our stewarding of this planet, of our connection with the world, the ecology of this world, the plants and the trees and the animals. And I think children and young people are really tuned into this. They're really aware of this, aren't they? They are bothered about issues of injustice in the world, perhaps more than we are. We watch the TV and we flick over to the next thing and we watch the bad news. Whereas I know from my own children, they want to do something. This is wrong, that the world is the way it is. It's wrong that we're chopping down trees and trees and trees and trees. It's wrong that animals are becoming extinct. What can we do? Spiritual identity. Why? Because it's there in the first book of our Bible. I've created you to be stewards. You have some responsibility. It's part of who I've made you to be, says God. And look after it. This is an important part of our spiritual identity. The reason I've put this grid up here is because I think it's important to hold this in mind when you are setting up your prayer spaces. Try and include prayer activities that involve all of these 4 areas. Don't just stick to the bottom right-hand corner, but include all of them, because they're all an important part of our spiritual journey. When you have a look at the activities even in the back of the room, you can see where they fit into one or more of these categories. Was that helpful? Great. So here's a few examples of activities. Most prayer spaces may have a space for being still. I find it really interesting that young people who are so active, at the end of an hour in a prayer space, when you ask children and young people, what was your favourite activity? Lots of them point to the corner with the tent and the cushions and the being still. Why? Because they are desperate to be still, they just don't know how to do it. And I think prayer spaces provide a moment of pause. Be still. It might be noisy stillness, but it's still stillness. And that's really, really important. Some of the activities are pleas. They're about asking God things. They're petition, if you like. And I don't know whether any of you have used bubble tubes here in Malta. Has anyone got a bubble tube? No. In England, it feels like every prayer space has a bubble tube. I'm sure Amazon must be wondering why they're selling so many bubble tubes. It's the Christians, they're buying them all. And so it's, the bubbles rise and the children write their pleases, their hopes, their wishes onto the bubble tube. Maybe it's a similar metaphor to the incense in the Old Testament, rising, this constant rising to God. Maybe it's just a similar metaphor for that. Most prayer spaces will have an activity to do with self-image. Who am I? How do I feel about myself? And that's really important. So they'll have a tall mirror, and there'll be some little quotes from the Bible, or maybe from some famous people, some popular songs. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are beautiful no matter what they say. Some positive quotes. And then there will be some instructions, a question. What if these were more true than how you feel about yourself? What difference would that make? I was in a state school just last June, and we were with some 15, 16-year-olds, and they were all kind of, too cool. And when they went and explored the prayer activity, and at the end, the prayer activities, and at the end, they all kind of stood around. They didn't want to sit on the floor, so they stood around. My friend Steve, he's a youth worker, and he was asking for some feedback, and he said to them, were there any activities that you found difficult? And there was this one boy, taller than me, 6'2", 6'3". He said, I didn't like the mirror. And Steve said to him, why was that? Why didn't you like the mirror? And he turned round to his friends, who were all standing around, this whole class, and he said, the thing is, you know me as like one of the popular ones. You know I'm good at sport and I'm good at my lessons. But what you don't know about me is every morning when I look in the mirror, I hate myself. You could have heard a pin drop. in the room. There was utter silence. Two beautiful things had happened. One, this 15, 16-year-old popular, got it all together boy had decided this is a safe space for me to say the stuff that I hide from everyone. This is a safe place and these are safe people. That was the first beautiful thing. This is a safe space. The second beautiful thing was that all of the other students felt exactly the same as him. And what he did was he opened the door for them all to say, yeah, me too. And so we spent the whole of that week in lots and lots of pastoral one-on-one conversations with some of these students, encouraging them. Do you know what? You're better than you think you are. You really are. And you need to receive some of that encouragement. Some incredible things can happen in these prayer spaces. These students are writing their worries on some stones and they're dropping them in a big tub of water outside. There aren't many prayer spaces happening outside in England. You have better weather, so make the most of outside spaces. Most prayer spaces will have some activities that are about the world and injustice. I've seen lots of students writing post-it note prayers or putting beads on America over the last 18 months, more than ever before. Lots of these children will write Trump on their post-it note. When you ask the students, why did you write Trump? They don't know why. They can't really explain why it is, but they're worried. Yeah? I think a lot of children and young people these days, they are anxious, they are worried about the world. They don't quite know how to express it, they don't know who to talk to about it, but they feel anxiety and worry. And I think what we're doing with these prayer activities is providing a safe space to express some of that. To realise that, oh, my friends feel like that too, I didn't know that. That's helpful for me. And so that's valuable. We did this activity yesterday, didn't we? At Sylvana's school. It's about homelessness. The children crawl inside the boxes. They were having quite a lot of fun, weren't they, in these boxes? But the idea is to imagine what if these cardboard boxes were on the street, and what if this was your home? How would you feel about that? Quite a powerful experience. Again, another activity that's been used a lot in England. 18 months ago on our news feeds, you saw this, I'm sure, boats of refugees coming across the Mediterranean, many not surviving. And so this activity invites a couple of students, get inside this boat, have a look at some of the pictures from the news. Do you remember this? Imagine what it would feel like if you were in this boat, escaping, and you're never going to go home again, because it's just too dangerous. All you've got is what's in your bag. How would you feel? If you want to, why don't you write a hope or a wish or a prayer? A hope and go. The student is holding a stone in her hand. The narration has said to her, unforgiveness is like a stone. We hold it on the inside of us. It's heavy. When people do things and say things that hurt us, sometimes we carry them inside us for years. Sometimes the people don't even know that they've hurt us, but they've said something unkind and we carry it inside of us. Forgiveness is about being kind to yourself. It's about letting go. And so this student is deciding, am I ready to let go? Am I ready to put the stone into the bowl of water? Some students, when they take the headphones off, they put the stone back on the pile of stones because they don't feel ready to let go. Sometimes those students are the ones that come back the next day or the day after and say, Phil, can I have another go at that activity? Because I've been thinking and I realised I need to let go. And so they do the activity again with tears coming down their faces and let go. Forgiveness is a powerful thing, isn't it? It's an incredibly powerful thing. I've included this little photo, this lovely little boy from Pakistan, because his name's Simon and he did this Forgiveness Stones activity, and we got this email from the head teacher, who said, after doing forgiveness stones, Simon shouted in the class, "I'd thrown the stone in the water and forgave my sister." You can imagine him doing it. And then the principal herself, the head teacher herself, said she felt peace and inner joy after so many years. Prayer spaces aren't just for children and young people. You do realise this, don't you? They're for us too. And they're for the parents. Prayer spaces teach us how to. There's a reason why Jesus keeps saying, unless you become like little children, you're really going to find the kingdom of heaven difficult. You're going to really find it difficult to grasp the things of the kingdom unless you become like little children. He wasn't just playing with words. I'm convinced that children, they just find this stuff easier because they're not as cluttered as we are. Yeah? Anybody want to confess? In the Congo, we had an email from a French missionary who was working in the Congo, and she did a forgiveness activity. Read this, this is incredible. I'll read it to you actually. One of the activities was to pray for those who need help, and to my surprise, so she was working with abandoned girls. This school was just for girls that had been abandoned. These abandoned girls prayed for the parents who had abandoned them. For me, it was a good lesson in forgiveness. Isn't that incredible? These abandoned girls chose, they weren't told what to do with the activity, they chose to use it to express forgiveness to those who had abandoned them. Some activities are to do with expressing feelings, and this one, Name That Feeling, it's on the website. There are these cards that you can order from Amazon that display different types of ways of feeling. And sometimes these are a good way to encourage children to express their feelings. I know that Silvana's used this one. We had this one yesterday in the school, the empty chair. Who is missing from your life at the moment? Who was there but isn't there anymore? Maybe someone who you've loved and lost, someone who's died. Maybe someone who's moved to another country who you miss dearly. They've left your life and you feel that loss. Maybe it's a pet. We've got 2 dogs. They're cockapoos. I don't know if that means anything to you, but they are kind of a poodle crossed with a cocker spaniel. I never wanted dogs. I did not want dogs. But I have a wife and 3 daughters who did want dogs. And so over the years they've been like beating me down, persuading me. And so I finally said, all right then, we'll have dogs. Who walks the dogs? Me. I walk the dogs. Every day I walk the dogs. Who's the one that cuddles the dogs when we watch TV at night? Me. These dogs have got into my heart. They really have. And so I really understand now when children and young people write, my dog died and I really miss him. I don't even want to think about the day that my dogs will die, because I will probably outlive them, because I will miss them greatly. And for a lot of children and young people, that's their first experience of loss. And it's very, very important. And sometimes they feel a bit silly about feeling like that, and they don't know who to talk to. And so activities like this are really, really important. There's so many stories I really would love to tell you, but we don't have time. Most prayer spaces will include some kind of sorry activity. Here's a few sorry prayers that children have written. I'm sorry for sometimes using my angry side. That's quite a good one. How about this one? Sorry for egging your house. Now, I don't know if you understand what that means, but this was a girl in a secondary school who'd thrown eggs at a church. And this is actually on a big wooden cross, a bit like we've got that. But this is in a state school, and this girl wrote, sorry for egging your house. But what was interesting was that wasn't enough for her. She then went and spoke to the RE teacher and said, I want to tell you what I've written. And she was being really serious. She wasn't laughing about it at all. I really do feel sorry, and I need to tell someone. We've noticed in prayer spaces that Often, children and young people, they do the activities as like a half step towards then telling someone. The step to telling someone, confessing their sin, asking for forgiveness, forgiving someone, is too big a step. It's too risky. But the activities are like a half step. They bring it to the surface and they give the children and young people the confidence then, I know I need to go and tell someone about this. So you often get that kind of experience. Can anyone read this? Fighting?
Fighting.
My sister. Not very good English. God's got a red pen and he marks it and he gives it back. Dear God, I'm sorry for being me. And this is how a lot of children and young people feel. There is sometimes some laughter, even when you shouldn't really laugh. I'm sorry for not looking up my... I love that it's in brackets at the end. So my favourite activity is big questions. If you're going to run a prayer space, please include this activity. It's very simple and it's just this. There might be a table with some torn up cardboard, maybe from string hanging from the ceiling with some pegs, and the students are invited. Whether you believe in God or not, imagine God was sitting here at the table. What is the one question that you would like to ask? What's the one question? You get to ask God one question now. What is your one question? I love doing this in church as well. I love asking groups of adults as well. What's the one question? Not the question you think you ought to ask, but what's your question? It might be, why's my wife got cancer? It might be, it might be like this child. Why are there so many religions? I just don't get it. I only believe there's one God. There's not lots of gods. I'm a monotheist. I believe in one God. I don't understand why. How have people got so confused? Maybe your question is like this child's. It's quite an angry one. You allow wars, God. Why? And as if God needs to understand the difference between war and not war, this child has kindly drawn us some pictures at the top. God, war makes people sad. If you stop the wars, everyone would be happy, God. Well, how about this one? Does everyone go to heaven? Now that might be a child kind of thinking, I don't understand the theology of this. It might not be. It may be that this child has overheard mum and dad talking at home. And sadly, granddad died recently. And mum and dad were talking about, granddad didn't go to church. Granddad wasn't a believer. And maybe granddad's not going to heaven. And maybe this child is terrified of this. Maybe that's the theology in that home. So maybe that question is really a heart question. It's not a theological question at all. It's a painful, personal question. Look at this one, for example. This is an interesting one because you've got the head question and the heart question. Why don't you make everyone perfect and stop bad people while you can and help them become nice? That's the head question. Here's the heart question. Plus, why don't you stop my parents from fighting? That's the real question. Sometimes we hide our real questions behind some theological questions, don't we? God, why is there so much suffering in the world? My real question is, why is my daughter deaf? Sometimes we hide those questions. And so it's really important to invite space, to create safe spaces for those questions. God is not threatened by our questions. Even Jesus asked a big question that wasn't answered in the way that he wanted. Yeah? It was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus asked the question, God, I don't want to do this. Is there another way? I would rather do something else. I think I know what's going to happen here. Please, is there another way? Jesus asks a big question. Jesus asks the same question, really. There's so much suffering ahead, and I really don't want to suffer. Is there another way? And in that garden, something incredible happens. God doesn't give the answer that Jesus wants, but God does give himself. Yeah? Grace comes so that Jesus is able to say, yet not my will but yours. I trust you. That grace coming, that giving of God's presence is so important in prayer, isn't it? So many of the children and young people we are working with have big questions, and what they really need is to experience God's grace, God's presence, so that they know God is with them, even if the questions don't get answered. But the first step is to ask the questions, and we need to create safe spaces for them to ask questions. There's always some funny questions. Why did you make wasps and flies? That is a great question. Wasps, what is the... I get bees, bees are important, but wasps, what are wasps for? Maybe someone can tell me afterwards. Or how about this one? What was the first crisps called? I don't think God had anything to do with that, but hey, that's a good question. Or what about this one? Why do people have bad rabbits? Now you're right, it might be habits, but it might be rabbits. Who knows? Maybe they've got a really bad habit. So I love the big questions. Now here's my advice. If you're running a prayer space and you have the big questions activity, and maybe Father Ruben, we've asked Father Ruben to be on that table, to be with that activity. Big questions is a good activity to have one of your team beside it. Now, when I'm speaking to the class who've come into the prayer space, and I've explained to them what we're going to do, some of you have got faith, and that's great, and we think these activities will help you to explore your faith. Some of you don't have faith, but you feel like maybe you would describe yourself as spiritual. Maybe you wouldn't use that word, but you believe there's something more to life. These activities will help you to explore that too. And then there's others of you who think, actually, faith and spirituality is a load of rubbish. You might not be brave enough to admit that, but that's how you feel. Do you know what? You're very welcome here too. I know we've called it a prayer space, and we might have called it something else, but that doesn't matter. We've called it a prayer space, but you are very welcome here too, and you don't have to pray if you don't want to. Okay, class? You okay with that? When you look around the activities, you'll see that some are about worries and big questions and broken relationships and gratitude. They're about things that we all feel, whether we have faith or not, yeah? They're human. We have some common experience here. So if you don't have faith and you wouldn't describe yourself as spiritual, you're very welcome to use these activities in a way that works for you. Is that okay, everybody? Finally, there might be a couple of you who wished you'd gone to the history class or geography class instead. I'm very sorry, but this is your lesson time and you have to be here. But you're not under any pressure to do any of the activities if you don't want to. If you want to just walk around and watch and see what some of your friends are doing, that's okay. Just don't spoil it for other people. Yeah? Yes. So what I've done is I've invited everyone, I've excluded no one, and I've told them it's all for you. Use it how you want to. And then I might say, Father Ruben is over here by the Big Questions activity. If you want to talk to Father Ruben about your big question, you can. But you don't have to. Here's the thing. If you do ask Father Ruben your question, don't expect him to have a good answer. That's not because he's stupid. He's a very clever man, actually. But the thing is, Father Ruben has big questions as well. In fact, so do I. All of the adults here in the room, even your teacher here, even Miss hold on over there, she has big questions, don't you? Yes, Silvana, you do, don't you? Yes. Have I got any big questions? Yes. We all have big questions. We're the same as you, children, young people, so don't expect us all to have big answers. But we might be able to discuss them together. And what I'll have said to Father Ruben beforehand is, Father Ruben, if any of the students ask you a big question, don't answer it quickly. My best advice is to say, that is a great question. What do you think? Because the question you're asked might be a head question and it might be hiding a heart question. Don't try and answer don't try and give a theological answer to a painful question. That's just cruel. What do you think? Even better, hey, if that child's with some of her friends or some of his friends, Sarah's question is a really good question, isn't it? What do you all think about Sarah's question? Encouraging some conversations and dialogue. So the questions aren't for you and me, they're for God. So let's not hurry to answer them. Let's encourage the quest, the journey of discovery, and not just find answers to questions. We've not really got time to linger on this, but there's lots of information on the website about this. But if you're going to create new prayer activities, and please do that, there's some advice on how to create really good ones. Make sure they're clear and simple. Don't fill them with lots of philosophical or religious ideas. Make them really, really simple. Make them easy to access. Make them relevant to the children's lives. Make them about worry, fear, questions, relationships. The things that are going on in their lives. Don't start with a religious idea or a religious story. Start with the children's lives. That's exactly what Jesus did, isn't it? Jesus talked to people about their lives, and he then helped them to discover what God was like by talking to them about their lives. Yeah? So we need to do that. Make sure they're interactive, there's something to do. We've talked about them being inclusive of everyone. I think prayer activities teach skills. I think they teach skills of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of how we handle grief. They teach all sorts of great life skills. Make sure that some of the activities are personal and some of them are for groups to do together. Our spiritual journey, as we saw earlier, is a personal thing, but it's also something we do with others. And make sure that you know how these activities are rooted in the life, the words, the ministry of Jesus. I don't think you need to have a Bible verse on every prayer activity to make it more like Jesus. I don't think God is more present when we add Bible verses. If a Bible verse is going to help explain the activity, fantastic. Be still and know that I'm God. That's a great verse from the Bible to use in a be still area. Yeah? But don't feel like the prayer activities are more Christian if they've got a Bible verse attached to them. You and I, we need to know how do these activities express who Jesus is and what Jesus says. But we don't need, I think, to teach that to the children and young people. Just to finish off, here's a few things that students have said, and then we're going to have coffee. This boy said, I liked everything because it let me open myself and be me, not something that's not me. Isn't that interesting? That's a great bit of self-awareness. That boy's basically saying, most of the time, I'm not me. And when I was in here, I felt like I could be me. I imagine that's exactly what people said about Jesus. Most of the time I'm trying to be something I'm not. But when I'm with you, somehow I feel safe to be myself. I can let it all out. Isn't that a beautiful thing for someone to say? Lots of students, lots of children, lots of young people, when they leave a prayer space, say things like this. It made me feel good about myself. And I imagine heaven dancing with excitement when a child or a young person says this. You feel better about who you are. That is fantastic. That's the first step of discovering that God loves you as you are. Oh. Helps you calm down when you're angry. That was probably a teacher who wrote that. This is interesting. This is a great way to help, I should probably say, people pray even when they do not believe in God. Lots of children and young people we found will write things like, I'm an atheist, but if you're there, God. And I think they do that because they've been welcomed to come as they are. They don't feel under pressure. They don't feel like this is a Christian space and I've got to try and be a Christian to join in with this. They're invited, come as you are. Come as a Christian if you're a Christian. But if you're an atheist, you're welcome. If you are questioning, you're welcome. Just come and explore. Taste and see what you might find. And many students, many children and young people write things like this. And the other side is true. For lots of children that have faith, they like prayer spaces because it helps them to explain some of what they believe to their friends who don't have faith. Because it's fun. And they're not embarrassed about it. They like it, and their friends like it, and so they can say, well, actually, this is a bit of what I believe as a Christian as well. And then you get lots of just beautiful statements like this, or this, or this. It's a great place to hire teachers. 2 quotes from teachers and then we'll have coffee. There's a teacher in Oxford, this is in a state school. She said, I was sceptical about the idea, I thought it might be a bit naff. Do you know what naff means? Naff is like rubbish, you know, a bit cheesy, you know. Or there might be a lot of evangelising going on. That's interesting. So this teacher was a bit worried that the Christians were going to come into her school and were going to try and proselytise. We're going to try and persuade these children to be Christians. That's what she was afraid of. So some schools, we experienced that. I was surprised, though, to see queues of students coming in and out of the room and give the place rave reviews. I think it was a brilliant idea. If it could continue, it should. It really added something to the school. The final one is this. This is a head teacher. She leads 5 schools. She's what we call a superhead. And her comment was the prayer space had a bigger impact on the students' well-being than anything else they'd ever done. She's not a Christian herself, but has said this. Has a greater impact on student well-being. So when you're starting your first prayer space, explore the website, have a look at the stories, get encouraged, get some resources, find some friends, talk about it, some allies, maybe pray about it. That might be a good thing to do. Start with the relationships that you already have. Schools, what's the parish connections that you already have? Or what are the parents that you think might be able to help you? If you can, visit a prayer space. The great thing now here in Malta is there are lots of prayer spaces already happening. So get in touch with Father Ruben or Silvana or maybe others that you know running prayer spaces. Go and visit one, have a look and see what it's like. And then, as I said earlier on, before you get on to sorting out the activities, think about your team. Get your team together. It might take a little while, but get your team together. Once you've done that, then decide where it's going to be, decide on your prayer activities, talk about the kind of safety of the children, what kind of policies are there in school. And for us in the UK, there's a whole series of child protection policies and things that we need to be careful around. So talk about those with the school, what kind of preparation and publicity you want, think about how you're going to run the prayer space. Is it going to be for a day or for a few days? And then do it, and it'll be brilliant. And that's time for coffee.